Whenever I've been to Asia, even Europe, and I go back to the States, I feel like we're almost in the States neurotically self-obsessed with our personal stories and our emotions, and don't print that in the States. But I feel that. I really feel the difference, and it feels too much.
The deepest attachment that conditions our lives, and the one that is at the root of the suffering in our lives, is the strong attachment we have to the view of self, to the sense of self. The idea that there is someone behind experience to whom it is all happening.
What about me? That's my first thought every morning. What happened to me is the last thought every night. Has this gotten me anywhere? Any more friends? Any more love? More joy? It should have by now. In fact, by now I should be a bundle of joy. Because I say this mantra every day. What about me? What about me?
I'm the liver. I'm the gallbladder. We wouldn't be doing that. But we wrap it all nicely in skin. So it's a nice package. Yeah, that's me. It's because we're not seeing deeply enough. So we identify with it. I remember in college when I was studying Eastern philosophy, and we were reading the Bhagavad Gita, and there was one line in that book, and I didn't know anything at the time, this about Eastern Buddhism. There was one line that just captured my attention, even though I didn't really understand it. It said, to act without attachment to the fruit of the action. And somehow, that was like to act without attachment to the fruit of the action. I don't know, it was like some seed in me, you know, and that just grew. And in university, I was studying philosophy because I wanted to understand my life and my mind, but it was very unsatisfying because it was mostly just the study of what people said, but not really how it applied to my own life. So when I went to Thailand and Bangkok and heard the Buddhist teachings, it was so about how to live a life, you know, and so pragmatic. So it just felt like coming home. The thought is the thinker. It's love that loves. Anger angers. Fear fears. Mindfulness mindfulnesses. Each quality is simply expressing its nature. So we want to begin to investigate, to see the ways both that we identify with these elements of the body and mind, claiming them to be self, and through insight, through awareness, to learn to be in the experience of them without adding the extra piece, this is me, this is mine, this is...
In fact, it's embarrassing. I say this mantra all day long, like the beating of my heart. What about me? 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 What about me?
I started to meditate when I was in the Peace Corps in Thailand. I was teaching English right in Bangkok, and I started going to discussion groups led by some English-speaking monks, one Englishman, one Indian. And I had studied philosophy at the university, so I came to these groups with a lot of questions. You know, I had so many questions that people stopped coming to the group because it was too annoying. So finally one of the monks said, "Joseph, why don't you try meditating?" So I think it was a way of getting me to be a little more quiet. But that was the first time, and he gave me these basic instructions of just watching the breath. So I gathered all my stuff together, my cushions and mat, and set my alarm clock for 5 minutes because I didn't want to sit too much. But a very remarkable thing happened just in those 5 minutes. I saw that there was a way to look into the mind as well as look out from it. And that was like a huge discovery for me, that there was actually a systematic way to look in. So that was the beginning. And I was so excited that I used to invite my friends over to watch me meditate. But they didn't come back very often. I was very confused. I hadn't really had systematic teachings, so I was just mixing a lot of things together. I was watching my breath and doing mantras and watching my third eye, and just everything I had heard got mixed up. So after a week of this, I realized how confused I was, and I realized I needed a teacher. Friends of mine had stopped in India on their way back from Thailand and had met different teachers. So I thought, well, I'll go back to Asia, I'll stop in India, and if I don't find a teacher there, I'll go on to Thailand. And in India, I did travel around to some different ashrams, but I ended up in Bodh Gaya and met my first teacher, Anagarika Munindra. And he said something that was so straightforward and so simple that it really captured me. He said, if you want to understand the mind, sit down and observe it. And that was it. I mean, there was nothing to join, and there weren't any rituals or beliefs or anything. It was just that very straightforward common sense. If you want to understand your mind, sit down and observe it. You know, how else could we understand our mind?
The International Meditation Center of Bodh Gaya, India, 1982. The Center of Anagarika Munindra, which is the host for the ordination of 12 to 15 American Buddhist teachers and students, including Joseph Goldstein, James Barras, Wes Nisker, Stephen Smith, Ray Lebofsky, and others. This is the Dharma teacher, Joseph Goldstein, beginning to have his head shaved.
Oh, don't say that. He's telling me how beautiful my hair is.
When a friend of mine was going to India, she had attended a lecture by Trungpa Rinpoche. This was in the early years. And she said she's going to be going to India. Who should she study with? And Trungpa thought for a moment, and he said, I think it's best if you follow the pretense of accident. Right? The pretense of accident. Things seem accidental. But actually, when you look back over a life, you see the patterns. I became interested in the Tibetan teachings because of this close friend who himself had studied, and he suggested, why don't you go to India to meet my teachers? So it's just a life unfolding.
These are the postulants dressed in the white robes of a prince, preparing to go to the great Mahabodhi temple of the Buddha. They ride on an elephant to show that even the great pleasures and wealth of the world must be left behind for the true seeker of the awakening of the heart, of the freedom that the Buddha sought in the midst of all of birth and death.
Even in India, even before coming back to the States, I had studied first with Munindraji for quite a few years, 3-4 years intensively, and then Goenkaji started teaching, another great teacher. And Munindraji, he was very open, and maybe that's where I got it, since he was my first teacher. He always encouraged his students to go study with whoever they had interest in. There was no holding or clinging. He had a very open, curious mind himself. And when he was in Burma, he had trained in one tradition, the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition. But when he finished his training, he asked permission and received permission to go study with over 50 different teachers of Vipassana in different styles. So he had this very embracing quality of mind, and it suited me very well.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the great Taungpulu Sayadaw sit together to bless the gathering.
This form of Vipassana, this form of insight practice is so austere, is because it really has been preserved through monastic tradition, you know. And it was in Burma in the last century with Mahasi Sayadaw who started really opening it up more and more to lay people to come to his meditation center and meditate, but it's still within that, you know, very austere monastic form, not eating after noon, the silence, the sitting, the walking, the concentration. So for me, I have a deep appreciation for the monastic and the nuns too, the monks and the nuns who have preserved this over the centuries. That's, of course, another big shift here. It's a bunch of lay people, a bunch of just, at least in America, what I know of the Vipassana scene in America, and a little bit some here. You know, I think it was a bunch of hippies who went over to India and came back and started offering the teachings, and slowly we were learning as the teaching was going on about the importance of the ethics, the importance of generosity, the importance of a lot of the aspects that comes with the monastic lay interaction in Asia that doesn't exist in the West. Just let yourself sit as comfortably as you can. And just finally, after all this week, there's just nothing else to achieve. There's nothing else to do. You can just let it all go and appreciate yourself just as you are. So let's just take a breath, let it out. Just relax the mind and the body, let all the words go. If you don't remember it now, it's useless, it's gone. Just be here.
In Asia, the traditions are quite isolated from one another and don't know much about each other. In the last 30 years or so, you know, so many schools of Buddhism have funneled into the West and in the States and in Europe. So not only are teachers meeting each other, but students are practicing in different traditions. So there's just a meeting that has not happened for so long.
Let yourself just feel your body. Breathing in and out of the heart center, imagining that. noticing any tone or mood in the mind and welcoming it in, just including the mind, your body. I don't know that I'm wholeheartedly behind making a label Western Buddhism as compared to Asian Buddhism. I think that's simplistic. I don't personally feel completely comfortable with that clear of a distinction. Because at least for me, and I think for some of the other teachers I teach with, I wouldn't like to feel that I'm doing something that really isn't what I was taught or what I've practiced. Although it's certainly coming through my own understanding and my culture and my cultural values and the way we communicate. So yes, it's different, but it's not two different beasts.
When I take a shower, I think, what about me? I hope this shower makes me feel happy. I hope this kiss makes me feel happy. I hope this lunch makes me happy. I hope these clothes make me feel happy. I hope this donut, this cup of coffee, this new affair, this new job.
But in the Mahasi Sayadaw style, which is quite a few teachers, there's a very specific form of how you report in an interview. And they want you to report on what's happening in your sitting, in the rising, in the falling of the breath, and what you noticed. So if you were to come in and say, I remembered this thing with my mother, he would either completely say what was happening in your sitting, or he'd say, did you note it as thinking? Did you note it as remembering? And if you say, yeah, that's fine. Okay, then what happened to it? It went away. It got stronger. But then my mother, and I felt so sad. Did you note sadness? Yes or no? Did you notice sadness? Okay, what happened to it? Just on that level. So you can bring anything in that happened, anything that happens, but within the context of what's arising now, how did I notice it, what happened to it? Not within the context of this is my story and I'm so and what can I do about it? You see the difference that the ego, the sense of me in this story isn't upheld. And it's only as it's arising right now.
What about me?
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 So I don't feel any sense that you can't bring something up, but it's just not going to be gone into on a level of personal history in the way that we do in the West. And I actually can see some good in that because, to be really honest, whenever I've been to Asia, even Europe, and I go back to the States, I feel like we're almost in the States neurotically self-obsessed with our personal stories and our emotions, and don't print that in the States. But I feel that. I really feel the difference, and it feels too much. Now in Asia, sometimes with some teachers, it's too little. There's people who are really suffering enormously from, say, self-hatred or low self-worth. That's a huge one that a lot of Asian teachers just don't even seem to understand. And so someone can come in with that and they'll just say, did you note it or try harder? I mean, the worst thing you can say to someone who's in a knot because they're not doing it good enough. So that's the real miss. That's something that is really quite difficult for people who have strong striving and low self-image and self-hatred, and it gets involved in how they meditate, and the teacher just doesn't see that. You know, I've just heard horrible stories, you know, where they say, well, someone came in and reported, said, well, you just can't do this meditation well enough, kind of gone, you know, that just doesn't work. Whereas in the West, we understand that, and we can, you know, acknowledge it and help people learn how to be mindful of it, but including it, you know, in a way that has more understanding.
This new spiritual practice, this new movie, this new CD. Oh, this new CD will make you happy, 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 happy. Will make you happy, happy.
What about me?
That's my first thought every morning.
What about me?
What happened to me?
What about me?
It's my last thought every night. Has this got me any more love? Any more love?
one thing that I appreciated a lot in the Tibetan teachings, which is found in Theravada teachings, but it's not emphasized as much, is the whole teaching of bodhicitta. And just really cultivating that aspiration that our practice be for the benefit of all beings. Now that's found in the Pali texts. I mean, the Buddha said to his first 60 enlightened disciples, go out for the good and the welfare and the benefit of the many. So it's there, but it's not emphasized in the same way. So when I heard that, and it was wonderful, I heard the teachings of bodhicitta, and I understood the connection of that with the teaching of selflessness. And I saw that they were really the same thing. They were two sides of the same thing. So that was a coming together of elements of different traditions, in something that was so powerful. We can plant that seed every day. We can plant it at the beginning of the day. We can plant it at the end of the day. And to hold this aspiration, which is this is a vast aspiration, right? That our lives be for the benefit of all beings. So we want to do this not with some grandiose idea. We want to have a tremendous humility with this and realize we're just planting a small seed. Maybe it's even having the aspiration to have the aspiration. Right? We just recognize the possibility of its great value. Right? That can become the guiding principle of our lives. May my life, may my practice be for the benefit of all.
This new city, this new country, this new planet, this new universe makes me happy. You know what? None of it will make you happy unless you do one simple thing. Change me for you. Change me for you.
We hear that teaching every time we get on an airplane. Because before the plane takes off, the announcement comes on, if there's a loss of cabin pressure, the oxygen mask will descend. Please put on your own mask first and then help the people around you. Why do they say that? Because it makes sense. We need to be secure ourselves before we can really help anybody. So that's from one side. From the other side, and Shantideva, who wrote the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, and he just expresses the other side so well, that we should put others before ourselves. And that's the practice. And through that kind of practice, the sense of self diminishes. And the Dalai Lama is a great devotee of Shantideva. He wrote something very pointed. He said, we are often like senseless children, shrinking back from suffering, but loving its causes. And when I read that, it was like nailed. He got it. We shrink from suffering, but love its causes. I began to understand bodhicitta, or the aspiration to benefit all beings, as being the expression of emptiness. Compassion is the activity of emptiness. So if compassion is resting on the shoulders of a self, well, it will always be limited, because the self is not big enough or strong enough to save all beings. The self is always a very limited viewpoint. But in understanding that compassion is simply the activity of emptiness, it's the activity of selflessness, then everything became possible.
And say, may you be happy. May you be happy. May you be happy.
That's my first thought every morning.
I'm a cynic, actually. I mean, even the Buddha couldn't really change his society, could he? I mean, his clansmen were having wars with each other, and he could go and arbitrate being who he was, and then a lot of them would come and become monks, and then the women went and became nuns. So, actually, Joseph and I were just talking about this today. If I read history, I read history a lot. I personally don't see any big change in the last time that there's been history. You know, the world is mad. But on an individual, one person, one level, which in some ways, that's all I can do. You know, I can start with myself. You know, do I want to add more pain to the world? Do I want to keep coming from aggression and delusion and greed? Can I come from a more connected, more wise, loving place? That's, you know, where I can start.
It's a last thought every night. This has given me so much more love, so much more joy.
You know, and even on this retreat, read the information sheets of people. I've studied where they list who they studied with. I've done Vipassana retreats. I've done Zen retreats. I've done Tibetan retreats. Unusual. So again, it's still a question. How is it going to evolve? You know, and hopefully what's not skillful about it will fall away and something good will emerge. So we'll see. I think it's in a state of a great experiment at the moment. But it's not a question of whether or not it should happen, because it is happening. It's happening historically. And so it's quite a historical moment in the history of Buddhism.
I give you a big fat kiss, take a shower, and make my bed when I dance, make you happy. When I give you the remote control, make you happy. When I sit on a park bench by myself, when I feel the sun, the breeze.
Honestly now, that as it touches other people and they start to shift in their own lives, that has some little effect on those people. And they'll have some effect on the people they touch. Big picture, I don't think any big change is going to come. But small picture, yeah, you know, one person, two people, three people, and that seems to me worth doing rather than not.
Stare into your eyes. Make you happy. And you know what? When you're happy, I'm happy. That's the formula. First you, then me. That's all happiness is. It's just the heart being free.
That's my first thought every morning.
What about me?
What happens to me?
What about me?
It's my last thought every night.
Wilt u naar aanleiding van deze uitzending reageren of een gratis programmagids bestellen? Bezoek dan onze website boeddhistischeomroep.nl. DVD's van onze programma's kunt u bestellen op 010 411 3977.